There's 4 things that you need to start melting metal at home. I'm going to tell you everything. For each of these 4 things, I'm going to give you a cheapest option and a money's no object option. Number 1, location. This is number 1 because it's the most important. Fire ain't no joke, and we're playing with a lot of heat. Your foundry's going to reach temperatures upwards of 1500 degrees Fahrenheit. That's pretty hot. First thing to consider when picking a location is what I like to call the heat cone. Now the heat cone is this imaginary cone that extends above your foundry that encompasses all the heat that could light something on fire. This imaginary heat cone needs to have nothing in it. No trees, no branches, no parts of buildings, nothing. The cheap option for this might require some creativity and extra work, but it most likely won't cost you anything. Take a look at your backyard. Do you have any clear areas where that heat cone we talked about would be empty? You might have to trim some branches or move some stuff around, but I guarantee there's a spot somewhere in your backyard where you can make it work. Now you can put your foundry on grass, but I don't recommend it. 1, it's gonna kill that patch of grass for sure. And 2, the grass is something that could potentially catch on fire. If the backyard isn't an option, the driveway is a great alternative. Now you might get some weird looks from the neighbors, but who cares? Just make sure to clear all the cars off of the driveway, park them on the street or something so you have a good radius of safety. Also, if your driveway isn't level, you're gonna have to level the foundry with some bricks or something. The second thing to consider when picking a location to melt is air ventilation. So I definitely recommend someplace outside, away from brush and trees. I have a pretty decent 12 by 12 gravel and rock area where I can melt. I move my forge and my foundry out into the middle of this, but any place on pavement, concrete, good to go, or dirt without any brush. I do not recommend melting inside a building like a garage. One of the main reasons you don't want to melt inside a building or a garage is because of possible toxic fumes, especially if you're working with aluminum cans. Those give off the plastic paint. You don't want to breathe that shit in. Number 2, you need some sort of heat source. I like gas because there's less smoke and it's a predictable heat that I can work with. I like to use propane. Propane's a good source.
Hey Hank, look, propane!
Now we're talking about propane, but the cheap option for your heat source would be to use coal. Now coal, while it might be cheaper, it does require a lot more work. Propane, you can turn it on and forget about it. Coal will burn a lot hotter than propane, it just takes a lot longer to get there. I actually recommend using propane, but then also learning about coal so you can have that in your back pocket if you have to. If propane's the route that you're gonna go, you're gonna need some sort of a burner. Now the type of burner that I built is called a Venturi burner. A common type of Venturi burner is called a Ron-Reel burner. Now the only difference between mine and a Ron-Reel burner is a Ron-Reel burner has the gas come in at a perpendicular angle and it's got a hole that the gas comes out this way. I just decided to make the gas flow parallel. So the gas flows in here and the air flows in right behind it just due to fluid dynamics and physics. Now I built this one, got all the parts off of Amazon. Now this one required a little bit of welding. Right over here, I had to weld this piece in there. But it's a very simple design, fairly cheap to make. Now the Moneybags McGee option for this, for propane, I would buy a couple of big propane tanks, at least 30 pounds. You can go up to 45 pounds. I wouldn't go much bigger than that because that's a heavy tank to be moving around. And on top of the big propane tank, I would get a few small ones. Maybe 3 to 5 of the small 15 pounders you can get at Walmart. Those are great to have around. And you can also purchase propane burners already pre-built. Now the other part of the heat source is something to contain the heat, a foundry. Now if you're going to DIY this, there's a few things you're going to need, and just about everything you can get on Amazon. I'll put links down below. DIY can be fun, but it can also be very stressful, costly, and time-consuming. There are 3 different insulating materials that furnaces are usually made from: fire bricks, refractory cement, and ceramic insulation, or K-wool. And each of these materials has their own pros and cons. Fire bricks are bricks specifically designed to handle very high heat, like in a foundry. Refractory concrete is concrete specifically designed to handle very high heat, like in foundries and forges. It's a great insulator, and it also absorbs a lot of heat. So once it gets hot, it'll stay hot. Ceramic insulation is kind of like fiberglass insulation, except instead of glass fibers, it's made with ceramic fibers. And ceramic is one of the best insulators on the planet. making ceramic insulation one of the best insulators, and it also doesn't heat up. Ceramic insulation is also very light. So a forge or a foundry made mostly out of ceramic insulation is going to be very light and easily moved around. Now on the other end, if you use mostly fire bricks and refractory concrete, it's going to be very, very heavy. So either put it on wheels or pick a spot and leave it there. Now my foundry design, I used a combination of all three, but it's mostly refractory concrete. So I used fire bricks to make the inner walls of my foundry furnace, and then I poured concrete and I put ceramic insulation in between the gaps. If you have spaces for the heat to leak through, it'll leak through. So the more heat tight you can make your foundry furnace, if you're gonna do a DIY, it benefits your potential heat output of your furnace, especially if you want to melt copper. Copper takes a lot of heat. Now my lid is 100% refractory concrete, and I've had this bucket for about 2 years now. Now my forge, on the other hand, is 100% ceramic insulation with a couple of fire bricks for the floor of my foundry. So my foundry heats up very quick because of the ceramic insulation reflects everything, and the ceramic insulation keeps the heat from transferring to the outside of your forge or foundry. Whereas my foundry, because it's mostly refractory concrete and fire bricks, it's going to absorb a lot of heat and it's going to hang on to that heat. So the entire furnace is going to get hot and stay hot. And that's not bad. Now the third thing that you're going to need to start melting metal at home is actually a lot of things. Your tongs, your crucible. I also recommend getting some fire bricks. Fire bricks are very handy to have, especially when you're working with super, super hot things. You can put your hot lid on it, you can put anything hot on it, hot slag. Oh, and I recommend some sort of a poking stick, something that's not just straight, maybe has like a little bit of an L on the bottom so you can pick out slag of the hot metal. That's definitely handy to have. You're also going to need gloves, some sort of very, very good insulated gloves for handling hot things. I also recommend some sort of a jacket, like what welders wear, that's not going to melt. And you're definitely going to need eye protection. You only get 2 of these bad boys. I recommend a face shield. A face shield is going to protect your whole face from any sort of molten splatter. You don't want molten splatter on your face. Alright, the fourth thing that you're going to need to melt metal, you're working with liquid metal, you need something to pour that stuff into. I recommend getting a cheap steel muffin tin. Don't get aluminum, you need steel. Aluminum will melt. These are great cheap molds when you're first starting to melt metal, and it's really good for making smaller portions of the hot metal that you want. The other option for molds would be Petrobond or some sort of a green sand for sand casting. I recommend just buying the Petrobond itself. I tried making the green sand. It's a lot of hassle. Just buy the Petrobond, it works so much better. It's not that expensive. But the end result can be not as good as